She looked up, and in that moment, something about her gaze made the world feel quieter. Her eyes were steady, confident, but they carried a trace of fatigue, maybe even loneliness. She was older than me, clearly, but it didn't feel awkward. It felt grounding, like a presence I wasn't expecting, but somehow needed. "I could use a hand," she admitted, her voice soft but not hesitant, carrying a warmth that made the mundane act of moving boxes suddenly feel significant. She shifted a box in her hands, and I noticed how her fingers lingered lightly over the corners, how she adjusted her posture with a careful elegance that spoke of experience and quiet strength. I stepped closer, offering to take one of the heavier boxes. Our hands brushed for the first time as I gripped the edges. The contact was fleeting, yet it left a curious warmth running up my arm, a subtle reminder that human connection could sneak up in the most ordinary moments. I smiled awkwardly, hoping it didn't come across as anything more than polite assistance. As we maneuvered the boxes together, I couldn't help but notice the little things. The soft rustle of her clothes as she bent to lift, the faint perfume that hinted at roses and something woody underneath, the careful way she balanced strength and grace. There was an unspoken rhythm developing between us, each movement synchronized without words. For a moment, we paused at the top of the stairwell, both catching our breath. The sunlight poured through the narrow window, casting her hair in a warm halo that made it impossible not to admire the quiet elegance she carried effortlessly. She laughed softly at something I'd said, just a fleeting sound, but it lingered, embedding itself in the space between us. I realized then that this encounter, so ordinary on the surface, carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. I was 20-something, usually confident in my independence, yet here I was, drawn in by a stranger's presence, noticing every small movement, every subtle nuance of her expression. And somewhere, beneath the casual offer of help, there was an unspoken curiosity in both of us, a hint that this encounter might become something more. By the time the last box was balanced in my arms, the hallway felt different, familiar, yet tinged with the possibility of connection. I didn't know her name, I didn't know anything about her life, but for the first time that week, I felt a spark of anticipation. Maybe it was the boxes. Maybe it was the quiet courage in her eyes. Whatever it was, I knew that this moment, simple and fleeting as it was, had already left its mark. The last box I had lifted was heavier than I expected, and I felt the strain in my shoulders. She moved closer, her presence suddenly more immediate, more grounding. There was something in the way she lingered beside me, as if weighing whether to ask for more than just help with the boxes. I thought I had read the situation, that our interaction would end with polite gratitude and smiles. But then she did something that stopped me entirely. "Could you carry me too?" she whispered. The words were soft, almost shy, yet carried a gravity I hadn't anticipated. For a moment, I froze, unsure whether I had heard correctly. My brain raced, trying to parse the meaning. Was she joking? Testing me? Or something more? My chest tightened, a mix of curiosity and a flutter of excitement that felt entirely new. She was standing close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the gentle slope of her shoulders, the subtle warmth radiating from her presence. The air between us seemed charged, not with desire in the crude sense, but with something far more fragile and intimate: trust, vulnerability, and the quiet acknowledgement that boundaries were being invited to shift. I lifted my eyes to hers, searching for a clue, and I saw it. A flicker of nervous anticipation, a delicate uncertainty masked by her usual confidence. She wasn't demanding. She was asking, quietly, as if offering me the chance to choose, to accept or not, but either choice carried weight. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped closer. When I reached out, I barely brushed her side, almost accidentally, and the warmth of her body against mine was immediate, electric in its subtlety. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, soft and woody, mingling with the dusty scent of cardboard. Her hand lingered briefly on my forearm as if testing the air between us, and for a fraction of a second, the world contracted until it was just us, the boxes and the sunlight spilling through the window. I wanted to speak, to find the right words, but no words felt adequate. There was a silence that was not awkward but charged, as though every heartbeat was a question waiting to be answered. And in that silence, I felt something profound. The start of a connection that had nothing to do with age, looks, or circumstance, and everything to do with this small, fragile human exchange. I finally managed a laugh, quiet and uncertain, hoping to bridge the tension without breaking it. "You really mean that?" I asked, my voice low, careful. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, her lips curling into a small, knowing smile. It wasn't teasing, not exactly. It was a soft acknowledgement, a shared secret between two people standing on the edge of something undefined. That moment, so simple in its setup, carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Carrying a box was one thing. Carrying her, metaphorically or literally, felt like stepping into uncharted territory, a space where trust and intimacy moved faster than logic. And as I adjusted my stance, readying myself, I realized that this simple act, this whispered invitation, had changed everything. We finally set the last box down, the wooden floor creaking softly beneath our weight. I stepped back, catching my breath, and she did the same. The sunlight had shifted now, spilling across the room in golden streaks that illuminated her hair in warm highlights. For a moment, we just looked at each other, both aware that the air between us had changed, thicker, charged with a quiet tension I wasn't quite ready to define. She let out a soft laugh, almost musical in its timing, and I felt the tight knot of uncertainty in my chest ease slightly. "You're stronger than I thought," she said, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. The motion was so simple, so graceful, but the touch brushed my skin just enough to send an unexpected warmth through me. I wanted to say something clever, something that wouldn't ruin this fragile balance, but all that came out was a sheepish grin. "You're not too bad yourself," I replied, surprising myself with the ease of my voice. There was a pause, a shared breath that felt suspended in time, and in that pause, I noticed the little details I hadn't before. The faint crease in her brow as she studied the pile of boxes, the soft shift of her weight from one foot to the other, the subtle way her hand lingered near mine, without quite touching. We moved to the stairwell landing, perching on the edge of the steps like two people caught somewhere between exhaustion and curiosity. The space felt intimate, quiet except for the occasional creak of the stairs and the distant hum of the city outside. Conversation started cautiously, almost haltingly. She spoke of work, of small frustrations and tiny victories, and I responded with similar honesty, finding a rhythm that was comforting in its simplicity. At one point, she tilted her head, studying me with an expression that was at once confident and vulnerable. "You don't talk much about yourself," she said softly. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, and that hesitation seemed to matter to her. There was a quiet acknowledgement in her eyes, a patience that made me want to be open, even though part of me still held back. Our laughter came in small bursts, light and unplanned. A joke, a shared observation about the absurdity of moving furniture, a slip of a box almost toppling over, each moment layered with intimacy. There was a tension beneath the laughter, subtle and persistent, that neither of us named aloud. Every brush of her fingers against mine, every accidental touch on the stair railing as we passed close, felt loaded with unspoken curiosity and desire. In those moments, I realized something important. It wasn't just the physical closeness that made my heart race. It was the way she let me see glimpses of her inner world. The confidence, the quiet strength, the vulnerability lurking just beneath the surface. It made me want to be better, gentler, more attentive. I wanted to earn her trust, to match the delicate care she seemed to give me without even trying. As the afternoon sun shifted toward evening, I felt an unspoken promise settle between us. Nothing needed to be declared yet. The tension, the laughter, the hesitant touches, they were enough for now. And somehow, just sharing that simple moment, perched together on the stairwell, made me feel closer to her than I had with anyone in a long time. After several trips up and down the stairwell, carrying boxes that seemed heavier with each pass, we finally paused on the landing, letting the last one rest against the wall. The room was quiet except for our shared breaths and the faint hum of the city drifting in from the open window. I sat down on the worn wooden step, and she hesitated for a moment before perching beside me. It wasn't a deliberate closeness at first, just a natural choice, two people exhausted yet unwilling to let the moment end. The air between us was charged with something I couldn't quite name. She shifted slightly, brushing her shoulder against mine, and the touch lingered longer than I expected. It wasn't intentional. At least, I didn't think it was, but the warmth of her presence settled over me like sunlight on a cold morning. My hand twitched, almost reaching to rest on hers, but I stopped, aware that this was uncharted territory, a line we hadn't yet crossed but both were hovering near. "Thank you," she murmured quietly, almost to herself. There was no need for context. The gratitude was directed as much toward the effort as the shared silence. I nodded, unsure how to respond because my chest felt tight with something unfamiliar, something between admiration and something deeper, something quieter but urgent in its intensity. We talked then, in that soft, unhurried way that only seems possible when two people are physically close yet emotionally cautious. She spoke of small moments in her life, memories of old apartments, fleeting regrets, and small victories that seemed insignificant on their own but became profound in her telling. I listened, noticing the slight catch in her voice when she mentioned loneliness, the way her fingers fiddled with the edge of her sweater, the subtle tilt of her head, as if inviting me into her world without ever asking outright. I found myself sharing, too, more than I intended, about my job, my family, the little fears I usually keep hidden. There was a trust building between us, slow and deliberate, an intimacy that didn't rely on grand gestures, but on observation, patience, and presence. Every so often, our knees brushed, and each time it sparked a flutter in my chest. Each brush of her arm against mine, though innocent, seemed to echo with meaning, leaving a warmth that lingered long after the contact ended. At one point, she leaned slightly, her head almost brushing my shoulder. It wasn't a deliberate gesture of affection, but it wasn't accidental either. There was comfort there, a silent acknowledgement of safety, of connection, of shared vulnerability. I felt the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat through the thin fabric of her sweater and realized how rare it was to feel this calm, this present with another person. Time slowed. The afternoon light softened as it streamed through the window, painting her hair in streaks of gold and brown. And in that moment, I knew something important. The age difference didn't matter. The world outside didn't matter. What mattered was this: the quiet closeness, the hesitant trust, the unspoken understanding that we were both teetering on the edge of something neither of us had planned, but both were drawn toward. The day had moved into late afternoon, the golden light fading into a soft, honeyed glow that filtered through the hallway windows. We were finishing the last few boxes, the air thick with the quiet exhaustion of shared effort. She paused, adjusting one of the heavier boxes with a careful tilt, and I stepped forward instinctively to help her. Our hands brushed again, this time deliberately, just long enough for warmth to transfer, for a shiver to run up my arm. "Careful," I murmured, keeping my voice low. She smiled, and it wasn't playful or teasing. It was subtle, a slow curve of her lips that spoke volumes without words. The smile lingered as she shifted closer, her elbow grazing mine deliberately, or at least it felt deliberate. My chest tightened with a mix of anticipation and restraint. I wanted to say something, anything, but the right words seemed impossible to find. The moment didn't require them anyway. As we lifted the box together, our bodies pressed lightly against each other, the shared effort bringing a closeness that was more than physical. Her hand rested briefly on my forearm, not fleeting, but a conscious touch. I felt the slight warmth of her palm, the gentle pressure as if she was testing the waters, feeling the boundaries of trust and connection. The brush sent a spark of awareness through me, something that made my pulse quicken without needing to acknowledge it aloud. I noticed every detail: the soft fall of her hair as she leaned, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the musky warmth of exertion, the subtle exhale that escaped her lips as she shifted her weight. It was intimate, but not in the way that made my thoughts leap ahead. It was intimate in a quiet, human way that demanded attention, presence, and care. "Almost there," I said softly, guiding the box toward the landing. She nodded, her fingers lingering a fraction longer on my arm before letting go. The brief contact left a warmth that clung to me, a reminder that something was building quietly and deliberately between us. I could sense her hesitation, the careful balance of confidence and vulnerability she carried in every gesture. After we set the box down, there was a pause. Neither of us moved immediately. She looked at me in a way that made it impossible to ignore the weight of unspoken words. Her eyes held a question, an invitation, and perhaps a subtle acknowledgement of the tension that had been simmering since the whispered "carry me too." I wanted to reach out again, to close the small gap between us, but I stayed still, letting the moment breathe, letting her guide the pace. Then, almost imperceptibly, she brushed a hand across my wrist as she straightened, a soft, deliberate movement that lingered. It wasn't casual. It wasn't accidental. It was intentional. And the realization that she had chosen to let me feel her presence, even in such a small way, struck me deeply. In that brief, charged touch, I understood something fundamental. This was more than attraction. It was a careful, patient invitation to closeness, a test of trust, a quiet acknowledgement that what was between us could grow, slowly, deliberately, meaningfully, if we let it. And I wanted nothing more than to rise to that invitation. By the time we finished moving the last of the boxes, the room felt transformed. It wasn't just lighter, cleaner, or organized. It felt charged with the quiet residue of shared effort, laughter, and the subtle tension that had been building all afternoon. We stood amid the scattered cardboard and packing tape, both of us catching our breath, our bodies still closed from hauling the heavier boxes together. She leaned against the wall for a moment, her eyes scanning the room, then shifted toward me, almost hesitantly. I noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the soft intake of breath she didn't seem to realize I could hear. There was a vulnerability there, delicate and unguarded, and my chest tightened with the desire to protect, to reassure, to simply be present. Without a word, she stepped closer, and I felt the subtle shift of her weight against mine. Her head rested lightly on my chest, not as a dramatic gesture, but almost casual, intimate in the quietest, most natural way. I froze for a moment, surprised by the simplicity of it, by the enormity of the trust embedded in that small action. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the heartbeat that pulsed gently beneath the thin fabric of her sweater. I lowered my hand onto her back instinctively, letting my fingers rest lightly between her shoulder blades. The contact was gentle, deliberate, and I could feel her relax further against me, her own hand brushing subtly over my forearm. The room seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us. The faint hum of the city, the lingering scent of her perfume, the weight of mutual understanding pressing softly between us. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but no words seemed capable of conveying the quiet intensity of the moment. It wasn't about confessions or declarations. It was about acknowledgement. It was about the unspoken recognition that something significant had begun, something that neither of us fully understood yet, but both felt. Her head lifted slightly, and I caught the faintest smile, one that didn't require explanation. It was enough to say that she had chosen to be close, chosen to let me hold her, chosen to allow the vulnerability and trust that had been growing between us to surface in this simple, perfect act. My heart swelled, not with desire alone, but with gratitude, with connection, with the weight of knowing that she had invited me into her world in a way that mattered. We stayed like that for several moments, neither speaking, neither needing to. The boxes around us, The mess we had created, the mundane details of the afternoon, all of it faded into insignificance. What remained was the warmth of her presence, the steady rhythm of her breathing against my chest, the quiet confession of mutual trust and attraction that didn't require words to be understood. Finally, as she straightened and stepped back, there was a sense of gentle resolution in the air. We had crossed a threshold, not with fanfare, but with subtlety and care. And though the future remained uncertain, the moment itself was complete, a silent acknowledgement of what had begun, a confession delivered through the simplest, most human of gestures, closeness, trust, and the willingness to be seen. The boxes were finally gone. The room, once cluttered and chaotic, now seemed calm, almost serene. The late afternoon sunlight spilled across the floor in long, golden streaks, painting her hair with a warmth that made my chest tighten. We stood amid the quiet aftermath, both of us a little tired, a little flushed, and yet reluctant to end the day. She shifted slightly, offering a small, genuine smile that tugged at something in me. "Thank you," she said softly, not just for helping with the boxes, but for the moments we had shared, the laughter, the quiet conversation, the unspoken understanding that had been growing steadily between us all afternoon. Her eyes met mine, lingering just a little longer than was necessary, and in that gaze, I felt the weight of everything unspoken: curiosity, attraction, trust, and a fragile hope. I stepped closer, instinctively reaching out to brush a strand of hair behind her ear. The contact was brief, but it carried a warmth that lingered, a reminder of the closeness we had built. I wanted to say something meaningful, to encapsulate everything that had happened, but words felt inadequate. Instead, I offered a smile, quiet and sincere, and let the moment speak for itself. She extended her hand toward me, almost as if to anchor herself in the shared space we had created. I took it, feeling the softness of her palm against mine, the subtle pressure that conveyed more than a casual handshake ever could. We lingered there, hands entwined, both aware that this simple gesture carried the promise of something deeper, something neither of us fully understood yet, but both were willing to explore. We started walking toward the door, our steps slow, neither wanting to break the connection that had formed. Every so often, our fingers brushed, a soft, almost accidental contact that made my pulse quicken. She glanced at me, her expression calm but curious, as if silently asking whether I felt it too. I did, deeply, and I hope my smile answered her unspoken question. Before stepping out into the fading light, she paused and rested her hand lightly on my forearm, just for a moment. The touch was fleeting, but it left a warmth that lingered long after we parted. "Coffee next week?" she asked quietly, almost tentatively. Her voice carried that familiar mix of confidence and subtle vulnerability that had drawn me in from the start. "Absolutely," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. There was a quiet satisfaction in that simple exchange, a recognition that our connection was far from over, that what had begun with boxes and whispered words had the potential to grow into something meaningful. As she walked away, I watched her in the soft glow of the evening sun, the sway of her hair, the quiet grace in her steps. The memory of her presence clung to me, the warmth of her hand, the faint scent of her perfume, the sound of her laughter echoing in my mind. And in that lingering quiet, I realized that ordinary moments, shared honestly and fully, could be extraordinary. I turned back to the now empty room, feeling a gentle contentment settle in my chest. The day had ended not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with something infinitely better. A connection, tender and real, a slow burn that promised warmth, laughter, and the quiet magic of two people choosing to be present with each other.